And you've been thinking that God is this mean and unfair God, that he's this God who operates in ways that's going to destroy your life. But I came here to let you know that there are certain circumstances that happen in your life that are simply a test to figure out what your character is. Abraham is now in a place in his life where, because of God's promises over his life, he has become so obsessed with receiving it that the Bible helps us to know that he and his wife try to make the promise come to pass by themselves. Because God says he's going to bless them and he's going to bless the entire nation, but the entire nation is only going to be blessed through Abraham's seed. But the problem is Abraham ain't got no children. And so in order to bring about God's promises a little bit quicker, you know the story better than I know it. The Bible says that Abraham begrudgingly goes into a tent. Come on, somebody. His wife tells him to sleep with her servant. He said no. Come on, somebody. I don't know if that's what the Bible said. Come on. But the Bible said he goes into the tent and he sleeps with the servant, and they have a child by the name of Ishmael. Ishmael is his firstborn son, but the problem with Ishmael is that even though he is the firstborn son, he is not the promised son of God. And so now God literally has to almost rebuke Abraham, and he has to rebuke Sarai in order for them to understand that God don't need no help in making what he says come to pass. And so the Bible helps us to realize that while he is rebuking them, he is also reassuring them, because he's helping Sarai to understand that even though you old, come on somebody, and your hips are not operating in the same way, that I'm still going to bless you with a seed. So God now blesses them with a son by the name of Isaac. Woo, Isaac is the promised son. He is the one that everybody's been waiting for. He is the one that Abraham and Sarai has put all of their hopes and dreams in. Isaac is the one who's going to carry the promise that God has given to them and to humanity. But when we get to Genesis and chapter 22, something disturbing happens. Because in Genesis chapter 22, it helps us to realize that the very same promise that God prophesied over Abraham's life, the very same promise that God gave over to Abraham, the Bible records in verse 1 that God is telling Abraham to kill it. And family, it doesn't make any sense, because they've been waiting their entire life for this. They're well in their old age, and they have put all of their trust and their hope in their child, which is named Isaac, because they know the promise of God is going to come through Isaac. But God does something suspicious, and he tells them to kill the very promise that they have been waiting for and have received, the very promise that they have put all of their hope in, the very promise that they love so much. And the reason why God tells them to kill the very promise that they love so much is because God never wants us to elevate, listen to this, the promise over the provider. Whoa! Family, you've got to see this thing. They've gone their entire lives waiting for this moment and put all of their eggs in the basket. But the problem is that now as Isaac is raising up and he stubs his toe, his father runs over to him and makes sure that it does not get infected. That as Isaac is growing up and he begins to get some bullies, his father stands up for him and protects his son, because all of his interests and all of their future are literally in the son. And as God is seeing Abraham and Sarah raise this child by the name of Isaac, God has to put a test in their life so that he can be sure that they don't trust the promise over the provider. Family, I need you to hear me on today, because while your name may not be Abraham and you might not have a son by the name of Isaac, every last one of us have received at least a portion of God's promise over your life. And here is the problem. The problem is when you take the promise and you coddle the promise and you love the promise and you massage the promise and you pray for the promise and you exalt God for the promise, but then you put the promise over the provider. And look, let me tell you something, family. The moment you put the promise over the provider, the promise becomes your God. And so God essentially has to put a test in Abraham's life so that he can find out where his loyalties lie. Family, I know we're talking about Abraham, but I need to ask you a question. If God were to put a litmus test in your life right now, what would he have to take away for you to turn your back on God? What would he have to take away for you to question his existence? What would he have to take away for you to get to the place where you feel uncomfortable? What would he have to take away for you to finally say, I am no longer one of his servants? Because whatever that is, that has been your God in your life. And so sometimes what God has to do, family, I don't want you to miss this thing. God is not just simply trying to take a life. He is not a mean God. He is not a God who's just doing something in a vacuum, but God is operating in a way because he is trying to pull out a character trait in Abraham that he will never see if he does not get tested. Child of God, I'm talking to you right now because someone is going through a tumultuous situation in your life right now, and you've been thinking that God is this mean and unfair God, that he's this God who operates in ways that's going to destroy your life. But I came here to let you know that there are certain circumstances that happen in your life that are simply a test to figure out what your character is.